Welcome to JCE Connect revision classes on modern interface design. So we were trying to revise module 3, that is Windows and Controls. So in the previous video we have discussed window presentation styles and some of the types of windows, and in this video we shall be discussing the topics such as selecting proper interactive devices and the guidelines for selecting these proper input devices as well as some of the output devices. So we have already seen that there are two different types of windows existing, that is the primary windows and the secondary windows, right? So some of the examples of secondary windows are palette windows, pop-up windows, which we have already discussed it in the previous video, and some other examples are the message boxes, property sheets, property inspectors, and dialog boxes. We know that the primary windows are basically used to perform major interactions, right? And the components of primary windows are like frames, title bars, title bar icons, title bar text, and the buttons in the title bars such as close, minimize, maximize, or restore. And then it also has menu bar, status bar, scroll bar, and the size grip onto it. Right. So similarly, the secondary windows are used to obtain or display supplementary information related to the objects that exist in the primary window. Right. So the components of the secondary windows basically include the frames or borders. They also have title bars, title bar text, and they have a close button. Right. So this button is context sensitive help. It provides us context sensitive help about the components that are displayed in this window, right? And this button may totally be optional, that is, it may exist or may not exist, right? So yesterday we have seen two examples of secondary windows. They were the palette windows and the pop-up windows. So today we shall in brief discuss about the rest of the examples here. So we also have something called as the dialog boxes, right? So we have dialog boxes. So these dialog boxes are used to obtain additional information needed to carry out a particular command or a task, right? So it's also a secondary window. It contains common dialog box interfaces such as open, replace, find, save as, print setup, and page setup, font, color options in it, right? So similarly we have one more example of secondary window, that is the property inspector. Here we have property inspectors. So these property inspectors are basically used to display the most common or frequently accessed properties of a current selection, right? Usually of some particular type of object. So these property windows are modeless secondary windows and typically model with respect to object for which it displays the properties, right? When do we make use of these property windows is when we are trying to display the information regarding the selected object, we can make use of them. Okay, so then we have one more option, one more example of the secondary window, which is the property sheets. We have property sheets. So property sheets are basically used for presenting the complete set of properties of an object, right? It's a modeless secondary window. So here you might be hearing to mode and modeless windows. So we shall shortly be discussing about both model as well as modeless secondary windows. So basically these property sheets are typically modeled with respect to the object for which it displays the properties. Right? It is displayed when requested from a particular selected object. Similarly, we have message boxes. So message boxes here are used to provide information about a particular situation or a condition. So it's again a secondary window, and the type of message boxes that exist could be one message box that offers information, the other could be the warning box, and the other one could be the critical. It could be a message box which shows some critical information, right? So these are all the examples of the secondary windows. So now, what do we mean by secondary windows either being model or modeless, right? So most of the secondary windows will be model, that is, they will not permit interaction with another window until the current dialog is completed, right? So it means that it remains displayed until a particular action is taken, after which it is removed from the screen. So model dialog boxes typically request critical information or actions that must be reacted to before the dialog can continue, right? So because the model dialog boxes constraint, what the user can do is limit their use to situations in which additional information is required to complete a particular command, or whenever it is important to prevent any further interaction until satisfying a condition, right? So similarly, a modeless dialog box permits the user to engage in parallel dialogues, right? So he'll be able to switch between the boxes and its associated windows. So another task that may be performed while a modeless dialog box is displayed, other tasks can be performed and it may be left on the screen after a response has been made, right? So actions leading to a modeless dialog box can be cancelled, causing the box to be removed from the screen, right? So always have to use a modeless dialog box when interaction with primary window or another secondary window has to be permitted, right? And we can also use it when interaction with other windows must be repeatedly be performed, right? So we have the other type of windows known as cascading and unfolding windows. So what is the purpose of this cascading windows, right? So a cascading window keeps the original window displayed on the screen along with the dependent window displayed on the top, and offsets slightly to the right and below the original secondary window. So you can see the secondary window. Here you have a window which has a button called as connect, right? You can see a button called as connect, which is when clicked it offers us the cascaded window here. So this is our secondary window with a button called as connect. So this connect yields us to a cascaded window. So what you can see here is connect itself appears as a separate window with a set of buttons and drop down menus there, right? So it's an indication that dialog will be cascading and is signaled by an ellipsis placed on the command button used to display the additional dialog box, right? So because of the confusion that can develop with too many cascades, we try to restrict these number of cascades to more than two in the given path, right? So do not cover information on the upper left dialog box that may have to be referred to, such as box title bars or other critical relevant informations. So if cascaded window is independent in its operation, then always try to close the secondary window from which it is being opened and displayed, and try to see that it is displayed only, it's trying to display only the new window that appears after clicking a button, right? So what do we mean by unfolding windows here? So unfolding window is again a secondary window that expands to reveal additional options, such as a form of, it's a form of a progressive disclosure, right? And let's see an example here. So you have a window here. So in this window you have an option, you have a button called as add followed by double arrows, right? So it's a command button which is used to display the additional dialog box here, right? So therefore we sometimes call the unfolding windows as the expanding windows. So if you can observe here, when the add button is clicked, the rest of the window is expanded, right? So unfolding windows are also known as expanding windows and are generally used to provide advanced options at the same level in the complex dialog. They are good alternatives when the interface contains a fixed set of options or controls that need to be accessed, right? So So now we shall discuss selecting the proper interactive devices. So as we all know that the interactive devices are input mechanisms or the devices through which people communicate their needs or desires to the computer, and output mechanisms or devices through which the computer tries to respond back to the people, right? So here we shall be discussing a set of, or we shall be reviewing a set of input devices such as trackballs, joystick, graphics tablet or trackpad, touch screen, light pen, voice, mouse and keyboard. So several specific tasks can be performed using today's systems, right? That is the input devices. The characteristics of input devices include that in these input devices can be used to point at an object on a screen, or it can also be used to select the object or identify it as a focus of attention. It's also used to drag an object across the screen and to draw something free form on the screen, also to track or follow a moving object, and to orient or position a particular object, and to enter or manipulate the data or the information, right? So these are all various different actions that can be performed by making use of input devices, right? So though we know how these devices function and what their advantages and disadvantages are, we shall quickly have a review of all these things. So basically, a trackball. The trackball is a spherical object that rotates freely in all the directions in its socket, and the direction and the speed is tracked and translated into its cursor movement, right? So the advantage of using trackball is it has a direct relationship between hand and pointer movement in terms of direction and speed, right? And it does not obscure the vision of the screen. Similarly, it does not require additional desk help, right? But the disadvantages are the movement is indirect in a plane different from the screen, and there is no direct relationship existing between the hand and the pointer movement in terms of the distance, and it requires a degree of eye-hand coordination and also requires hand to be removed from the keyboard keys, right? And it requires different hand movements, and it needs that the hand to be removed from the keyboard, and it needs additional desk space if not mounted on the keyboard, and may be very difficult to control and may be fatiguing to use over some extended period of time, right? So after it we have input devices such as joystick. So this joystick is a device anchored at the bottom, and it's variable in size. Smaller ones being operated can be operated by fingers, whereas larger ones require the whole hand. And the variable in cursor direction movement method forces the joysticks respond to pressure, and movable ones respond to movement, right? So it's also variable in the degree of movement. Variable in the degree of the movement is also allowed here, right from horizontal to vertical only to continuous, right? The advantages here is it there is a direct relationship between the hand and the pointer movement in terms of direction, and it also doesn't hide the vision of the screen and doesn't require an additional desk space. But the disadvantages, it requires a degree of eye-hand coordination, and it requires hands to be removed from the keyboard keys. All the disadvantages are similar to that of our trackball. But another disadvantage is these joysticks may be slow and inaccurate to use, right? So similarly, we have tablet, we have graphic tablet or trackpad. So here pressure, heat, light or light blockage sensitive horizontal surfaces that lie on the desk. The it's the pressure or light blockage sensitive horizontal surfaces that lie on the desktop or the keyboard. So it may be operated with fingers or light pens or objects like stylus or pencil, right? So pointers imitates the movements on the tablet. So what is the advantage here? So again there exists a direct relationship between the touch movements and the pointer movements in terms of direction, distance as well as speed, right? And it's more comfortable compared to others, and it also does not obscure the vision of the screen. And the disadvantages are like it requires an additional desk space, and similarly it requires hand to be removed from the keyboard and the keyboard keys, and it requires a different set of hand movements to use it, and fingers may be too large for accuracy when working with small objects here. So similarly, touch screen. So we also have touch screens. So in case of touch screens, it's a special surface on the screen sensitive to fingers or stylus touch. So advantages here is movement is direct in the same plane as the screen and requires no additional desk space, and it is suitable for use in any type of environment, right? So but the disadvantage is the finger may obscure a part of screen, and the finger may be too large for accuracy when working with very small objects, and it requires moving the hand far from the keyboard to use it, right? And it may sometimes soil the screen too. So similarly we have light pens. So it's a special surface on the screen sensitive to touch of the special stylus or pen. So again advantages are like movement can happen direct and in the same plane as the screen, wherein it requires very minimal additional desk space, and it is suitable to use in all environments, and it's more accurate than the finger touch than the finger touch, right? But the disadvantage is the hand may obscure the part of the screen and requires picking up to use it, and requires moving the hand far from the keyboard to use it, and it may also be fatiguing to use for extended periods of time, right? So similarly, voice, so it's an automatic speech recognition done by the computer system. The advantages are it's very simple and direct, and it's useful for people who cannot make use of keyboards, and for those whose hands are already occupied. And the disadvantages are they have higher error rates because of problems such as recognition or blurred word boundaries because of the normal speech patterns, and they are slow and they have very slower throughput than with typing, and these systems are very difficult to work with when working in a noisy environment, and it's quite impractical to use it in the quiet environments, right? And we have the other input device like mouse. So as we know, a mouse is basically used for movement of, it provides us the movement of screen pointers, right? Then we also know the advantages of it, like there is a direct relationship between the hand and the pointer movement, both in terms of direction, distance, as well as the speed factor, and it provides us comfortable hand resting position, and does not obscure the vision of the screen. But the disadvantage here is it requires the hand to be removed from the keyboard and requires additional desk space, and may require long movement distances and requires a degree of eye and hand coordination, right? So all these were the characteristics of these individual input devices, right? So on what basis do we select a proper input device, right? We need some guidelines to be followed when you are making a choice of a particular input device. So selecting a proper device depends upon again a set of factors, like the first one, the task characteristics, right? So that is, we try to we try to decide whether the device is suitable for the task or no, and then, for example, we provide keyboards for tasks which involve heavy text entry and manipulation, and we try to provide an alternative pointing device for graphical or drawing tasks. So, in this case, we can make use of mouse, joysticks, trackballs, touch screens, and graphic tables. And in case we want to provide touch screens under the following conditions, there is the opportunity for training is very minimal, and the frequency of use is also low, and desk space is at the premium, and little or no text requirement exists there. So similarly, we also have to consider the user's characteristics and his preferences. That is, will the user be able, we have to judge, will the user be able to easily and comfortably operate the controls? Are the fine motor movements required by some devices capable of being performed? And sometimes some children or people with disability such as they may not be in a state to use their hand may find it difficult to use devices requiring a high degree of accuracy. So all these things have to be considered when we are trying to select a particular input device, right? And similarly, also have to consider the environmental characteristics too. That is, we have to judge whether or will the device fit easily into the existing working environment. That is, we got to analyze if the desk space is necessary. Does it exist, or is it too large enough to fit in there? For example, some devices require very little room, like trackballs, joysticks, or graphic tables, but whereas mouse requires more space, right? So the public access systems will require uh, a sturdy device such as touchscreen, and whereas pen or stylus can easily be stolen or broken. So therefore, all these things, the working environment of the end user has to be analyzed before you make a proper choice of the input devices. So similarly, you also have to keep track of, or you will also have to consider the hardware characteristics, right? So that is, you'll have to judge, is the device itself of a quality that permits easy performance of all necessary tasks, right? So for example, joysticks are quite variable in their movement capabilities, so they can be used all times, right? So you'll have to study the hardware limitations of all the input devices and then make a proper choice, right? So the device in relation to application has to be analyzed here, right? So the device in relation to its application, that is whether the device is whether the device can satisfactorily be used for a particular application or no. Similarly, we also have to consider providing flexibility, that is, often task and users needs will vary within an application, right? So providing more than one kind of device will give the user a choice in how to most efficiently accomplish whatever is his task, right? So for example, keyboards can be paired with another kinds of pointing devices as and when necessary, right? So similarly, we are also supposed to focus on minimizing the eye and hand movements. So, when multiple devices are used, eye and hand movements between them must be minimized. That is, the structure of the task, if possible, must permit the user to stay in one working area. So, if shifts must be made, then they should be as infrequent as possible, right? So these are all the basic guidelines for selecting proper input devices, right? So once we have discussed about what are the various input devices and what are the guidelines for selecting the, having studied the characteristics of each of the input devices and the guidelines for selecting the proper input devices, now we move on to output devices, right? So the computer communicates to the user through the output devices, and the most common one being the display screens, right? So these screens are very useful for presenting a wide range of visual elements and complex data, right? So the when we are trying to choose a screen, you'll have to consider the following factors like image, colors, size of the screen. So what do we mean by focusing on image? That is, when you're trying to choose a particular screen, then you'll have to identify how detailed does the image need to be. So for a highly graphic applications involving much of work almost revolves around images and photographs, then a high resolution screen has to be selected, right? And then you'll also have to make a decision about how many colors are needed, right? So the colors may range from monochrome to millions. So therefore, the type of application that is being designed will have to determine this requirement. So size, like televisions, screen sizes must be measured across diagonal, and larger the screens, the more advantages exist. So more information can be displayed, and as can larger text and images. So the size almost depends upon the needs of the application and the needs of the user. Similarly, portability. So does the screen need to be portable? That is, basically CRTs are very heavy.